Every Christmas, he disappeared, and that morning I followed the footprints. I still remember the teacup in my hand, the little crack along the rim I'd pretended not to see for years, and the way the snow outside lay smooth and level, like icing spread over a cake. The kitchen light was low and forgiving, the kind of light that softens wrinkles and makes the world look like a photograph you can pick up and hold. I set the cup down more carefully than I needed to, and walked to the window as I always do. There, pressed into the white, was a single set of footprints, deliberate, steady, leading away from our porch and into the dark line of trees. For 20 winters the same pattern had played out. A chair left empty at breakfast, a vague excuse, and then the soft vanishing of his step. Every year the footprints seemed to ask the same quiet question: where are you going, and why won't you come back? My chest tightened the way it does when you first realize the truth of something you have only suspected. A church bell knelled somewhere down the street, slow and patient, like an old hand on a shoulder. The wind moved the holly outside and sent a few stray needles skittering across the path. I could have turned away. I could have sat down with the teacup and told myself that some things are better left folded like old laundry, but the mother in me, the part that kept family lists in the back of her head and could not abide. An empty chair leaned forward and whispered, "Follow." I thought I knew what those footprints meant, until they led me straight into the secret he'd hidden for 2 decades. Today we're going to talk about those Christmases he vanished. The ones that left me pacing the kitchen floor and tracing the same tired footprints through snow and memory. I'm going to tell you, step by step, what I found when I stopped saying maybe and started asking why. If you love honest, cozy, true life stories told by someone who has lived them, welcome to Grandma Cozy Stories. And if you haven't already, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next tale. I know your time is precious. I promise this story is worth staying for. Stay with me until the end. What I discovered that night changed our family forever, and there's a reason I waited 20 years to follow those footprints. If you leave now, you'll miss the moment everything shifted. So grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's begin. Asterisk. The morning light came through the lace curtains and turned the dust motes into tiny slow-floating stars. I keep the curtains for reasons more sentimental than practical. They belonged to my mother, and the little scalloped edge has seen more winters than I like to count. In the soft glow, the living room looked like an old photograph, familiar and slightly out of focus in the best way. I held my tea the way I always do, with both hands cupped around the mug as if warmth could be paused and tasted like memory. The tree in the corner had a few ornaments that belonged to different chapters of my life. A chipped red ribbon from my first Christmas as a bride, a tiny felt mitten my granddaughter made in kindergarten, a silver bell that had once hung on my mother's old porch swing. Each one is a small museum of someone we've been, or someone we miss. There is a quiet ritual I perform every December without thinking. I make the tea, I check the mailbox, and I walk to the window to see if the snow has settled in even lines. It sounds small, but ordinary rituals are anchors when your life has weathered storms. They are the steady things you come back to when everything else feels like it might drift away. Mailbox lit up, breath visible in the cold. I peer down the lane. My fingers rest on the metal just long enough to remember the texture. The cold bite of the iron. The world slows into its own rhythm. The tick of the wall clock. The faint hum of the heater. The soft creak of the floorboard where my slipper always finds the same groove. But even in the comfort of those small acts, there is the ache. Those Christmas disappearances aren't a story you put back on a shelf. They live in the space between my usual morning habits and the rest of the day. Each December the house holds its breath, and every rustle at the door makes me count. Footsteps are ordinary things. We are always surrounded by them. And yet a single set of tracks in white snow feels like a punctuation mark in a sentence you thought you understood. I have traced those prints in my head as if they were a map, left, right, left. A pause, then steady onward. For years the path ended in a blank space. For years I returned home to a chair filled with absence. There are small details that ground me when the unease is loud. The way the tea steam curls up and vanishes. The way the dog looks up when the street is quiet. The way my daughter leaves me a note on the counter when she knows she'll be late. I tell myself the ornaments are talismans, each one a story I can hold when other stories feel fragile. Yet when I bent down to wipe a smudge from an old glass angel and lifted my head, I saw fresh prints, fresh and different, deeper than the footprints I had learned to expect, like someone had walked with more purpose this time. My heart dropped the way it did when I first heard bad news, long ago. the old animal clench of worry that used to arrive at odd moments. I stood very still, the cup warming both my palms. For a second the world contracted to the distance between my windowsill and the snow. The church bell outside sang out again, a note that felt like a counting of time. I thought of all the little rituals that led me to this moment. The mailbox, the ornaments, the slow sipping of tea, all of them had prepared me to notice. And then I took a breath and stepped toward the door. Because the question at the end of those footprints would not leave me alone. I was raised in a house that everyone in the neighborhood could find with their eyes closed, white-clappered, a porch swing that creaked under the weight of a whole summer, and a garden my mother coaxed as if coaxing prayers into the soil. Our town was the sort where the hardware store owner knew your father's name, and your neighbors would bring over coffee if you happened to be awake at dawn. There is a kind of moral grammar you learn in a place like that. The rules are small and steady. Tell the truth, keep your promises, and mind the people around you. My father taught me the value of showing up. He was a man whose love spoke through deeds. If you needed help on the roof, he was the first to climb. My mother taught me patience, the sort of patience that tended gardens and people in equal measure. My first love arrived on a summer evening, under the broad shade of the old maple by the river. He had a laugh that made ordinary days feel like something special, and the way he looked at me taught me how it felt to be seen. We sat on the bank, feet in the water, and made the kind of promises young people make without knowing the weight they will carry. Those afternoons by the river taught me about faithfulness, not as a word but as a set of small, repeated actions, coming back when you said you would, keeping your word about small things until they add up to trust. But life in a small town also teaches you how quickly change can arrive. I remember the summer he left, not because of a blow-up or a fight, but because the road beyond town held opportunities he could not ignore. He left with a promise to write, a suitcase, and an awkward hope. He stayed away longer than he said he would. That first heartbreak was a lesson more brutal than anything my parents taught. It taught me how to gather myself, how to keep the porch light on for people who might not return, and how to carry on. I learned that you can be brave and still ache. Those early lessons became the North Star I followed when my own marriage shifted on a fault line I hadn't noticed. The idea of loyalty I inherited wasn't a narrow thing. It was broad enough to hold forgiveness, patient enough to wait for the return of small mercies, and strong enough to insist on honesty. When people ask why I kept looking at the footprints for 20 years, it isn't because I wanted to catch my husband out, or because I was naive. I followed them because a life of promises makes the absence of one feel like a wound. I had been raised to believe that the best way to understand someone is to notice the space their absence leaves behind. Small-town expectations can be heavy to carry. There is an unspoken ledger of reputation you balance, and the notion of scandal can feel like a physical thing, a cold stone lodged behind your ribs. Yet my parents also taught me the dignity of tending what you have, the garden in back, the broken step on the porch, and the people who depend on you. Those lessons would be the compass I would need when the footprints began to make sense, when the pattern of absence turned into a map, and when the map led me to a place I had not expected to find. We married young and filled our house with thrift store finds and patient routines. There was an old oak table where we ate every night, a radio that grumbled in the corner, and quilts my mother mended for us. We planted a small vegetable garden behind the garage, and claimed ordinary Sundays for family dinners. The life we made felt honest, stitched together with modest trust and laughter. It was the kind of steadiness that comforts you on dark evenings, the certainty that someone will be home, that supper will be on the stove, that the bills will somehow get paid. For a while, the rhythm held. But cracks are deceptively quiet things. They start as little absences, an evening out that becomes more frequent, a phone call that goes unanswered for longer than seems reasonable, a promise to be home that dissolves into thin excuses. At first, I told myself reasonable stories. Work is stressful, traffic was bad, he fell asleep in the chair. I rearranged my thinking like someone rearranges furniture to make the room feel familiar again. The children grew, the seasons turned, and every winter those small absences seemed to gather into a pattern. There would be one Christmas with a missing plate, another with an empty chair. I learned to stack plates in the sink and offer extra helpings without making the absence into a spectacle. It felt like honoring normalcy, like protecting the kids from small shocks that might dim their holiday. That there is a strange dichotomy in these compromises. For the sake of peace, you trade the right to ask some questions, and in return, you keep quiet mornings and less friction at the table. But silence collects in a house the way dust does on a shelf. Over the years, the quiet became more than tolerable. It began to feel deliberate. I started to notice patterns, a certain stiffness when a call came in, a way of looking out the window a beat too long. My mind began to catalog each small thing, like a ledger keeper tracking entries for future reckoning. I would find myself pausing at the sink, hands in dishwater, listening for the sound of footsteps that might mean everything or nothing. Each missing evening became a footprint in my memory, a map I would follow. One Christmas at a time. At first, the map was a curiosity. Later, it became a compass of worry. I did not want drama or public spectacle, only truth. I wanted to know whether our life was built on a foundation that would hold, or whether it had been propped up by a secret that would shift when the weight of years pressed down. And though part of me feared the answers, another part, the part forged by parents who tended gardens and held steady through storms, felt an obligation to find out. The house deserved honesty. The children deserved a life that matched the stories we told at the table. I found myself listening harder to the pattern of his steps, because sometimes the only way to guard what you love is to understand the space around it. That Christmas morning began like any other, with a soft snowfall coating the rooftops and the house smelling faintly of pine and cinnamon. I moved through the familiar motions, setting the table, humming softly, folding napkins just so. But something was different. The chair at the head of the table, the one where he always sat, remained empty. I tried to tell myself he'd overslept, that the world outside the bedroom was as ordinary as it seemed. But when I looked through the kitchen window, my breath fogging the glass, I saw the footprints again. They stretched farther this time, weaving past the garden, past the mailbox, and vanishing into the shadowed line of trees beyond the yard. My heart caught. I knew instinctively that these prints weren't like the others. This year, they were inviting me to follow. I hesitated. Could I? Should I? Following meant leaving the safety of the familiar, stepping into the cold and unknown, risking the fragile peace of our home. My daughter glanced up from her cereal, concern etched across her young face. I forced a smile, a mask of casual warmth, but my mind raced. Family stability hung in one hand, and the elusive truth in the other. The mother in me weighed both. Then, slowly, I let resolve replace dread. I couldn't sit by anymore. Not this time. I bundled myself in my thickest coat, wrapped a scarf snug around my neck, and tightened my boots. The flashlight rested heavy in my palm, its beam ready to pierce the darkened woods. My breath came in visible clouds, sharp and rhythmic, and each step toward the snow felt like a commitment I could not take back. The crunch underfoot was steady, a metronome keeping time with the beat of my heart. Every crunch, every shiver of cold air against my cheeks, reminded me of the stakes. I wasn't just following footprints, I was tracing 2 decades of absence, questions, and longing. As the tree line approached, the woods thickened, and the snow muffled the sound of the world behind me. Shadows clung to familiar shapes, turning every tree into a possible secret. I knew that following the footprints might uncover things I wasn't prepared to face. And yet, something stronger than fear, a blend of curiosity, protectiveness, and quiet fury, propelled me forward. I had no idea that what I followed would change the rest of my life. The footprints led me to a small, abandoned shed at the edge of the woods. Its paint was faded, the door cracked just enough to admit a thread of smoke that smelled faintly of old firewood. I hesitated on the threshold, a mixture of apprehension and resolve tightening my chest. The wind shifted, rattling loose shingles, but I stepped inside. Dust motes floated in the flashlight's beam, catching on cobwebs that draped over crates and shelves. The smell of old wood and smoke lingered like a half-remembered memory. I ran my hands over surfaces, brushing aside old rags and forgotten tins. And then I noticed it, a coat not his, heavy wool, hanging crookedly on a rusty hook. Nearby, a notebook lay open on a bench, its pages filled with neat handwriting, dates, and names I did not recognize. I picked up a scrap of paper, fingers trembling, and traced a date that matched the year he had disappeared without explanation. My mind reeled. All the absent evenings, the quiet excuses, the vague assurances they were connected to something tangible, something hidden. The shed felt simultaneously intimate and alien. Each object whispered questions I didn't want to ask aloud. Who was he protecting? What life had I overlooked while tending to the one I knew? I lingered over the notebook, turning pages slowly, feeling the paper's roughness beneath my fingertips, imagining his handwriting forming promises to someone else. My stomach churned. Could it be true? Could he really have been leading a life in secret, one that didn't include me? A quiet fear settled over me, cold and persistent, but it was mingled with fascination. I needed to know more. Then, in the far corner of the bench, buried beneath scraps of paper and a half-used candle, I found a name I didn't recognize. My breath hitched, and beside it, a date, one that aligned exactly with the week he vanished 2 years ago. My pulse quickened. The shed had shifted from being a curious hiding place to a revelation. Every absence, every vanishing Christmas, suddenly felt like a carefully plotted pattern, a map of a secret life I had never known. I stepped back, the flashlight shaking slightly in my hand, and realized that the footprints had delivered me here for a reason. The truth was close, just beyond reach, waiting for me to keep stepping forward. Back at home, I rifled through drawers, tracing the years of his disappearances with growing apprehension. That's when I found the letters folded neatly, hidden behind the false back of a drawer. The handwriting was familiar, yet the words were entirely alien. Each letter was addressed to someone else, names I had never heard, with dates spanning years of holidays and birthdays, the very times I remembered him vanishing. My hands shook as I unfolded the first one. "Dear Margaret," it began, "I hope this reaches you safely. I promise I will be there next Christmas, though circumstances may force me to wait. You are never forgotten." My breath caught. The letter was filled with affection, tenderness, and the weight of a promise he had never mentioned to me. I read another aloud softly, trembling, and the voice in my head cracked. "I will do my best to keep you warm, to keep your heart safe. Though I am gone from sight, I am present in all ways I can manage." My mind raced with conflicting emotions, heartbreak for the betrayal, awe for his selfless dedication, fear for what it meant to our family. It all swirled together in a storm I could not calm. I tried to confront him, imagined holding the letters up and demanding answers, but the words froze in my throat. The moral weight of what I had discovered pressed against my chest. Anger, battled, empathy. Could I blame him for caring in ways I hadn't understood? Could I forgive him while fearing for our children's stability? Each letter deepened the mystery, revealing not just absence, but a parallel devotion that had existed quietly, invisibly, for decades. One folded note made my hands go cold. The handwriting looked like his, but the signature was a name I'd never heard. I stared at it for a long moment, the paper trembling in my fingers. Every memory of past Christmas mornings, every footprint traced in snow, collided with the possibility of a life lived in secret. The letters weren't just evidence. They were a mirror to a hidden reality, one that demanded attention, courage, and a reckoning I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I didn't know where to turn, but I knew I needed counsel. Mrs. Langley, our next-door neighbor, had always observed quietly, the sort of person whose calm presence could hold the tension of an entire room. I showed her the letters, careful to fold and protect them, and her eyes widened just slightly. She said little, only murmuring, "Be careful." Yet the weight of her gaze carried reassurance, a subtle solidarity, in a world suddenly fraught with judgment. Asterisk. Words spread slowly at first, whispers in the bakery as I bought flour, sidelong glances in the post office, hushed commentary on church steps. Even casual acquaintances seemed to weigh my movements, reading between polite greetings for signs of disruption. My daughter, noticing my distracted glances and hurried departures, asked questions I could not fully answer. Solitude settled in alongside the growing tension. The familiar streets of our town began to feel like a maze, each turn shadowed by potential discovery. Every outing became a study in observation. I noticed murmured conversations that fell silent as I passed, windows flicking with light as neighbors speculated. Social pressure mounted, not just in idle curiosity, but in the moral weight of community. Expectations, marriages are sacred, families are visible, and secrets are whispered into the cold December air with surprising clarity. I felt the isolation of knowing something profound that the town could neither imagine nor forgive. And yet, there was also strength in that quiet, the sense that I was navigating a storm no one else had seen, guided by instinct and principle. The town didn't know everything, but it was starting to smell like news. Christmas Eve arrived, and with it, the familiar bustle of preparation that felt hollow against the mounting tension in my chest. The house was decorated with twinkling lights, wreaths hung just so, the scent of cookies and pine mingling like a bittersweet perfume. My hands trembled as I rolled dough and wrapped gifts, trying to maintain appearances while my mind replayed the path of the footprints and the letters I had discovered. Each movement, stirring batter, tying ribbons, was measured, deliberate. A small effort to steady nerves that refused to quiet. Then, at last, I opened the mailbox. Inside was a folded note, written in the same careful hand, but signed with a name I did not recognize. My pulse surged. The note was simple: "Come tonight, you'll see." No other instructions, no promises, no explanation. The handwriting was familiar, yet entirely alien in intent. I felt the cold rise in my stomach, mingling dread with adrenaline. Time had compressed. The stakes were urgent. There would be no more waiting, no more deferred discovery. If I hesitated, the opportunity and perhaps the truth itself might vanish. The house, so warm and festive in appearance, now felt like a stage, the lights twinkling against shadows that had grown heavy over the years. The clock ticked audibly in the background, counting down toward a midnight I didn't want to reach without answers. I wrapped my coat tightly, bundled the scarf, and prepared the flashlight, feeling the familiar crunch of snow underfoot as I stepped outside. Each breath hung in the air like a small warning. I knew I had only one chance to follow this path safely, responsibly, and courageously. The note told me to come, and promised nothing else. The cabin stood at the edge of a snow-laden clearing, its roof dusted with frost, smoke curling faintly from a crooked chimney. I approached with a trembling mix of anticipation and dread, the flashlight casting long shadows across the path. Every crunch of snow beneath my boots echoed in the silence, a metronome marking the seconds I'd waited 20 years to understand. As I pushed open the door, the smell of pine, old books, and faint smoke wrapped around me, strange and familiar all at once. Inside, the cabin was modest, yet unmistakably lived in. A small hearth contained the last embers of a dying fire. Toys, a wooden train, a ragged teddy bear, lay scattered across a corner rug. My hand froze on the doorknob of an old dresser, curiosity overtaking caution. Photographs spilled from the top drawer. A man I knew, smiling at a young boy I had never met. Tears pricked my eyes, and my pulse quickened. Another life, another family. Journals were stacked on a wooden table, carefully kept, each page chronicling his yearly absences. I read entries aloud in a trembling voice. December 24th, I stayed with David. He needed me today. Christmas is harder for her this year. The patterns became undeniable. Each disappearance corresponded with a promise kept to a widow and her son, a responsibility he had carried silently alongside our life. Flashbacks assaulted me, empty chairs at our table, his quiet whispers, missed anniversaries. But now I understood. Each absence was an act of devotion, a hidden sacrifice. I sank into a chair, overwhelmed by a storm of emotions. Betrayal clawed at my chest, but empathy followed swiftly, confusing and transformative. Here was a man who had loved in ways I had never imagined, bound by loyalty and promise. My mind replayed Christmases past, overlaying each memory with new understanding. The tiny details, a hurried phone call, a stray gift he brought home late, now fit into a narrative I hadn't known existed. Tears ran freely, icy fingers gripping my hands, yet I felt a strange warmth to shock collided with awe. Heartbreak gave way to understanding. The moral compass that had guided me since childhood, the lessons of duty, loyalty, patience, now offered clarity. He hadn't abandoned me. He had balanced love and responsibility in a way that was beyond ordinary comprehension. I stood, my hands trembling over the scattered photographs. Everything I believed, every assumption, every quiet resentment, was rewritten in a single breath. I understood, in a single breath, everything he'd been hiding, and why I could never go back to assuming. The footprints had led me here not to punish, but to reveal, to illuminate the complexity of love and loyalty in ways I had never fathomed. Understanding the truth was one thing. Revealing it would be another. I sat at my kitchen table late into the night, papers, photographs, and letters spread before me like a battlefield of decisions. Who to tell first? How much to reveal? What would the children understand, and what would fracture the family forever? Maps were marked with names and dates, phone numbers jotted in margins. I imagined conversations that hadn't yet happened, soft explanations to my daughter, difficult discussions with friends, managing potential town gossip. Each scenario carried risks, emotional, social, Practical. I scribbled potential responses, crossed out lines, and rewrote them. It was exhausting and relentless, a moral calculus that weighed heavier than any snowstorm outside. The practical challenges were immediate: winter roads, travel to the other, family, timing the revelations so that everyone could feel safe and supported. Nights were restless. I paced, traced footprints on paper, and rehearsed conversations in a low voice, balancing clarity with compassion. Even the smallest misstep could ignite fear, shame, or resentment. But amidst the anxiety, a stubborn resolve took root. This was not just about uncovering a secret. It was about protecting the dignity of everyone involved. Each choice carried consequences, yes, but failing to act would allow misinformation and misunderstanding to fester. To tell or to protect, that choice would have to be made by morning. The following days were a crucible. Rumors stirred, quietly at first, neighbors exchanging furtive glances, subtle questions at the bakery, the weight of whispers in church pews. Family noticed too. Meals became tense, sentences clipped, laughter more hollow. My daughter watched me closely, torn between loyalty to her father and unease over the secrets she could sense but not name. Even well-meaning friends and relatives added pressure. Invitations carried unspoken expectations. Hints of judgment lurked behind polite smiles. I felt the weight of everyone's gaze, the invisible tally of suspicion growing heavier with each step. Every outing became a careful negotiation, balancing honesty with discretion. Yet small gestures reminded me I wasn't entirely alone. A neighbor offered a plate of cookies, her eyes soft with concern. Later, I found a note tucked beneath it. "We're all waiting to hear the truth." The message was simple, yet it carried the collective breath of our town, reminding me that exposure was inevitable, but so was empathy. The scrutiny from all sides sharpened the stakes. Every decision mattered, and time was slipping away. The house was silent, save for the ticking of the clock and the occasional whisper of wind against the frosted windows. I sat alone in my armchair, shawl-wrapped tight, eyes fixed on scattered notes and photographs. My mind replayed decades, children's laughter, my first love beneath the maple, the small betrayals and quiet heartbreaks I had endured. Each memory pressed against me, reminding me of how fleeting certainty truly is. Sleep wouldn't come. My heart ached with grief for misunderstandings, for absences I had misjudged, for truths kept from me and from those I loved. I questioned my choices, my judgment, my courage. What was I willing to risk for clarity? What would be broken beyond repair? Yet, amidst the darkness, a fragile spark glimmered. I remembered my mother's patience, my father's insistence on resilience, the lessons of loyalty and courage that had carried me through earlier storms. Slowly, determination began to knit itself into my bones. I realized strength was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. The night stretched long, but within it, I felt a transformation. Anxiety, grief, and doubt coalesced into a singular purpose. When morning came, I had chosen, and the choice would change Christmas forever. Dawn broke with a gentle hush over snow-covered rooftops. I moved quietly, preparing the home and myself for what was to come. Evidence was gathered and organized: letters, photographs, journal pages, each carefully folded into envelopes. I called Mrs. Langley, arranging discreet support and guidance for the delicate conversations ahead. My hands shook as I poured tea into warm cups, each sip a tether to calm resolve. I rehearsed words in my head, prioritizing children's feelings and family dignity, thinking through how to balance honesty with empathy. Notes were tucked into pockets, phone numbers doubled, routes planned. Every detail mattered, every step intentional. The table was set not just for breakfast, but for revelation, reconciliation, and understanding. Chairs were pulled out gently, napkins folded, and the soft glow of the morning sun filtered through lace curtains. I felt the weight of anticipation settle over me, tempered by a quiet courage that had been hard-earned. I took a deep breath, placed the last envelope before me, and waited. Outside, the snow glimmered, as if the world itself paused in anticipation. I set the table for the conversation that would decide decades, and waited for him to arrive. Snow whipped sideways against the cabin windows, rattling the panes like a chorus of whispers. I stepped inside, each boot crunching the frosted wooden floor, carrying the weight of decades of unanswered questions. My hands shook as I laid the evidence on the table. The letters, photographs, journals, they were no longer just paper. They were the map of our hidden history, the trail of sacrifices and secrets that had shadowed every Christmas of my adult life. He looked up from the corner of the room, eyes wide, startled. You found all of this? His voice was cracked, tired, hesitant. The years of silence hung in the air like a fog. Yes, I said, voice shaking but firm. All of it. The footprints, the letters, the absences. Why? How could you keep this from us for 20 years? He ran a hand through his hair, looking everywhere but at me. I didn't want you to know. I had to keep a promise. She, the boy, they had no one else. Every year, Christmas was their only chance at family. My heart thudded, a mix of rage, heartbreak, and a sudden, unexpected empathy. And us? What about our family? Did we mean so little? No, he whispered. You mean everything. But I couldn't turn my back on him. I couldn't leave a child alone. I thought I was protecting you, protecting everyone. I sank into a chair, trembling, trying to catch my breath. The letters whispered from the table, each one a testament to a hidden devotion I had never imagined. I remembered all those vanished Christmas mornings, all those empty chairs, the ache I had carried for years. Yet, now, they were threads in a tapestry of care and loyalty, messy, imperfect, but profoundly human. I slammed a hand on the table, startling even myself. Glasses teetered, almost falling. Do you realize what you've done to us? To me, I do, he admitted, voice breaking. And I am sorry, more than I can say. The room fell into a tense silence. Outside, the wind shrieked. I studied him, the man I had loved, judged, missed, and mourned in moments of absence. I saw both the betrayal and the bravery etched into his features. Slowly, my fury softened, mingled with comprehension. The betrayal was real, but so was the sacrifice. And when he said the name of the child, the world tilted. I had a choice, to break or to build anew. The days following the revelation were a delicate dance. Family meetings were held around the dining table, cups of tea steaming, voices tentative. My daughter's eyes reflected confusion, pain, but also an emerging curiosity. Conversations were awkward at first, as everyone navigated emotions too big for a single day. We planned visits, holiday rotations, and careful introductions. The widow and her son were cautiously welcomed into our traditions. Neighbors watched quietly, some with raised eyebrows, others with gentle smiles of support. Slowly, rituals were adapted. Extra seats at the table, shared cookie baking mornings, overlapping gift exchanges. Trust, fragile and wary, began to rebuild. Small gestures mattered most. A hug after a long conversation, a shared glance over a cup of tea, a hand squeezed in quiet solidarity. The house felt alive again, the tension easing like a storm's end. Even the snow seemed softer that year, settling without the usual harshness, reflecting light off freshly polished ornaments. Daily life resumed, now layered with a newfound honesty. The footprints of the past had led to a truth, neither simple nor tidy, but in their wake, warmth returned. It wasn't tidy, secrets never are, but one morning I woke and the house felt like it had new light. Looking back, I see those footprints differently. They were not just marks in the snow, they were a path to understanding, courage, and resilience. Life will test you in ways you cannot predict. It will place choices before you that weigh heart against duty, comfort against conviction. Following those footprints taught me that truth, however painful, is the foundation for peace. Love is never simple. Loyalty stretches in unexpected directions. Empathy allows us to grasp actions that initially seem wrong but are, in fact, guided by deep care. My childhood lessons: patience from my mother, resilience from my father. First love's innocence had prepared me for this moment. Dignity, once embraced, steadies us in storms far stronger than snow and wind. Forgiveness is not instant. It is a journey, a series of choices to understand, to let go, to allow others and ourselves to heal. Small-town values, neighborliness, grace, second chances are not quaint. They are lifelines in moments of moral complexity. And if you find yourself at a crossroads, remember this: courage is quiet but persistent. Follow the truth, even when it is frightening. Speak when silence tempts. Listen when anger demands action. And, above all, love fully, imperfectly, messily, with patience. If you're holding a secret, remember, footprints can lead you to truth, but truth can also lead you home. The story didn't stay confined to our home. Letters arrived from neighbors, strangers, and grandmothers I had never met. I cried reading your story, wrote one. Another said, you gave me courage to confront my own family secrets. Online, comments popped. I waited with you, and I felt every step. Your resilience reminds me to trust my instincts, This brought tears, hope, and reflection all at once. Even small community gestures reflected ripple effects. A neighbor offered a warm loaf of bread, another dropped a card with encouraging words. Each note reminded me that honesty and courage resonate far beyond individual lives. The letters kept coming, and each one reminded me I hadn't been alone. The next Christmas shimmered with renewed warmth. The trees sparkled brighter, ornaments telling stories of resilience, love, and new beginnings. Plans for family reunions and summer adventures danced across the calendar. Even small routines, morning tea, mailbox walks, snow crunch underfoot, held new significance. Footprints in the snow remained, a gentle reminder that past, present, and future could coexist, and that holidays could be remade if we let them. We learned that holidays can be remade if we let them. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe to Grandma Cozy Stories. We share heartfelt tales like this every day. Share your own moments of courage, love, or family secrets. Next time, I'll tell you about the summer that changed everything, the one that taught me ordinary days can hide extraordinary secrets.